Welcome to the Civic Hacker Summit. I'm Lori McNeil, founder of the Civic Hacker Summit and director of the Civic Hacker Network. We are kicking off each day focusing on the theme of open data, science, and algorithms. And I think that this first speaker that you're going to hear from is the perfect person to really highlight the significance of this theme in all of our work. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Flavio Azevedo. Flavio is a political psychologist working as a senior researcher at Cambridge University's Social Decision Making Lab, where he focuses on uncovering the ideological basis of anti scientific attitudes and conspiratorial thinking. Flavio did his PhD in political science at the Graduate School of Cologne University, a German excellence center where he became a Fulbright Fellow to study political ideologies, their role in justifying social and economic injustices, and the psychology underlying why people endorse them. Flavio co founded and directs FORT, which stands for the Framework for Open and Reproducible Research Training. It's an interdisciplinary community of over 500 early career scholars aiming to integrate open science principles into higher education, as well as to advance research transparency, reproducibility, rigor, and ethics through pedagogical reform. Flavio is also the principal investigator of the Psychology of Political Behavior Studies, a series of studies informing psychological explanations of political attitudes, values, voting, and participation. Flavio won several international awards for his work on political psychology and FORT, but perhaps most notably, he was named as one of the 100 most influential early career Portuguese via the Global Shapers Initiative by the World Economic Forum. And his story was recently the subject of an interview by NASA where he talked about open science practices and equitable science for all. All right, Flavio, nice to see you here. Thank you so much for joining the summit. I'm, really excited for people to learn about FORT, and we can start with you having the task of explaining that acronym so that people are up to speed with, the basics of, who you are, what you do, how you came to founding this important platform.
All right, so my name is Flavio Azevedo. I am the co-founder and director of FORT. FORT is the framework for open and reproducible research training. And FORT is a community of interdisciplinary researchers. It's an international community as well. We're over 500 people together. Mostly we're composed of early career researchers, and we have essentially two goals. One is to integrate open science. We also like to call open scholarship, but I'll explain that in the future, into higher education. So essentially we want that to integrate open scholarship into higher education from the get-go. So learning, making students learn about open scholarship as they learn about the effects of science. So essentially, we are arguing that it's important that we think about the downstream consequences of open science and what that means for our teaching. What are the pedagogical and didactic consequences when we are teaching students about the effects of science? So essentially trying to teach students about the processes of science or the effects of science associated with the way in which this information or fact was acquired, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So this is mission number one, and mission number two is to also integrate something else into academia, which is the idea of diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice into academic structures and systems. And we believe that we're trying to advocate for that integration in many different ways, but a lot on open education, the way we treat each other, openness in general. So that's what FORT is. And we were just a little bit of history. We were founded in 2018. I co-founded it together with Sam Parsons, and now there is several different teams, and there is different projects working on a variety of open educational resources that you can check out on our website, fork.org. And it became a thing in of itself, and you know, it's other people's too, and that is an amazing feeling.
Yeah, I guess that is very fitting, right? Given the subject that it would become like an open and collaborative entity in and of itself. And then how is that, being received? It sounds like with so many collaborators coming on that there is great interest. Do you find that, generally newer researchers are excited and open to this, or do you feel like the traditionalists are still, you know, shining the brightest in academia?
Um, that's a really good question, Lori. I think that you know, there's both.
Mhm,
We are very well received, I think, in many respects, especially by early career scholars, because I think that the notion, the whole ethos of Ford, I think, feels very natural to a lot of early career scholars because I think that it matches more of how science should be, right? So when you learn about science, where you're like, oh, I want to study, I want to do a PhD or a master's degree, and you're the more you enter in contact with science, you have this notion that, you know, science is open, scientists are very open-minded, that, you know, we are very progressive when it comes to thinking. We're always trying to challenge our own views and our own ideas, and that, you know, it's for the good of society or the betterment of men, finding cure for diseases, solving societal problems, etc. So
mhm,
I think that this whole ethos or this whole imagination of what science is very much in line with this reform that now is, I don't know, a decade old or a little bit more, which is to make science more open, right? So the open science movement, sort of in a way, that's a very different framing that I'm giving you here than I think most scholars would give as an introduction. But I think that there is this fit of the imagination that how you learn about science versus what it actually is, which is a very hierarchical, very let me select the words here carefully, very structural and traditional and conservative area, right?
mhm.
So folks are you know, there's ivory towers, there's a lot of difficulty between the steps, and things are made so that unfortunately only the most privileged can succeed. So in many ways, it succeed in many ways, right? In accessing science, in doing science, in learning about it, etc. So in many ways, I think that open science and Ford itself is trying to sort of bridge that gap between most people's imagination and how science should be. And it's
Mhm,
Fork is not alone, by the way. There's many other organizations that are doing much more and better towards that bridging. But I
mhm.
think we are a small piece on that mission.
Right. Yeah, small and yet significant, because I am not steeped in the world of, open scholarship, yet I, learned about what you guys were doing through who knows the rabbit hole that is the internet, and looking at material that NASA had put out about
Oh yeah.
open, open science, and that they're having the 2023 be the year of open science, and it's like, okay, what's going on here? And I love that you brought up the bridging between the how science is taught and how we engage the best of our imagination, really, when we are teaching it, but then when you go to practice, that things change. And as somebody who does a lot of educational outreach, encouraging kids in STEM. Like, with educators, we talk about getting away from the stereotypes. Like, make sure we have women, make sure we have people of color. Don't, just show people in a lab coat. Like, don't do the Halloween costume version of what a scientist is. But, to your point, what is the reality, right? As we're freeing the kids' imagination when they go to practice and become early career researchers, what's the harsh reality there? So, yeah, I love that framing.
Yeah, and just to complement, it's just that, a lot of the social demographics of scientists are essentially so most science is you know Western is made on the global North, right? But even within the global North, United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, it it is only delimited to specific most privileged demographics within those communities. So science is even hard to reach for a lot of people, especially minoritized groups within so-called developed or highly industrialized and educated countries. And so it's there is a system of norms and practices that we call the hidden curriculum.
Mm,
And nobody knows about this. So I'm Brazilian. For example, I'm an immigrant, of course. But I come from a low socioeconomic status in Brazil. I started university at the age of 25 or 26. And so I started late. So I was a bus boy. I worked in the kitchen, cleaning bathrooms, doing, you know, house rebuilds and etc. And to me, it was super hard to understand these unspoken norms and practices that everybody took for granted. That comes from education, that comes from being in an environment from the beginning. So you kind of don't question that. So when I speak about accessibility of science, especially at Fort, unveiling this hidden curriculum is part of Fort's remit. There's two initiatives that effort that tries to do that, because it just helps perpetuate inequality, especially for those folks who are most vulnerable, who know the least and who walked the hardest path. For them, doing science or understanding why certain things are the way they are is extremely difficult.
yeah, and that literacy, Neil deGrasse Tyson is
Yeah.
just I just heard him promoting this book, right? Yeah, I love him. Hey Neil, if you want to be on the summit. But yeah, he was just, talking about the impact on society in his view, when the scientific literacy is just not present in a broad way, right? So if we limit access to the access that would allow our general, society to be more, I guess, yeah, just scientifically literate, it does. We see that, like, there's evidence of the impact on just the larger body politic, and how everything goes. But um, I don't want to go too far into this, making you say open science when um, we want to talk about the term open scholarship. So can we backtrack to kind of the differences there, and yeah, why we might, yeah, what's that nuance between the two
All right.
terms?
All right. So I'll do that, but let me preempt to listeners that this will take a little while to answer. So let's start with the status quo, the basic, right? Open science. So
Mhm.
open science is an umbrella term, right? And it reflects that the idea that knowledge of all kinds should be openly accessible, should be transparent, should be rigorous, reproducible, replicable, and cumulative. The goal of science is to accumulate
Mhm.
knowledge, right? So we can progress. And all of these features are fundamental features of the scientific endeavor, right? So open science consists of principles and practices with these goals in mind. So behaviors.
Mhm.
So what is open science an umbrella for, right? So while definitions vary, and this is super important, other folks conceive it as in a different way, but we can say that there's some agreement that open science has at least seven major aspects, or under the umbrella of open science, there is a few clusters. So the first one is open data. And that regards the idea that, all the data that you collect is not proprietary. You cannot have a copyright on it. You should share with folks. Folks can derive knowledge from it, etc. Open data, right? Open methodology. So materials, data, survey, questionnaires, etc. All that should be open so that other people can know exactly how you did your research, or any sort of knowledge advancement. Then the third aspect is open source, which is the idea that our lives, especially nowadays, not when I was born, but nowadays, there's apps for everything. You are surrounded by software everywhere you go. So having open code is helps the development of better tools in time and incrementally. The fourth aspect is open access, which deals with the idea that scientific knowledge be accessible to everyone, no matter where they are at all times, right? So, and today that's not the case. We have many journals that are closed that you can't access or easily access scientific output, which is, by the way, governmentally funded. So don't get me started on the industry and the status quo now, but listener, if we had the time to explain, you would be astounded by how insane this all is. All right, moving forward to open peer review. So peer review is the idea that I do my research, but I have my own biases, I have my own points of view, I have some training on something, but not in another topic, and then we send our work to a journal where we want this to be published, and other folks do an amazing voluntary work to engage meaningfully with your own work, compare to them and to their knowledge, and provide some feedback to you. So that's what peer review essentially is. But nowadays it's a black box, and for authors, as well as for reviewers, and definitely for readers of scientific scholarship. So we, within open science, opening this whole process. So meaning that, when you read a paper, the reviews come attached, right? So what other people said about this work. So this is open peer review. Then this is my remit, this is my goal. It's the sixth aspect, it's where I work, which is on open education. Open education is that, and believe me, in academia, people don't share their educational materials. So they teach, they develop sometimes amazing resources. They spend years developing and fine-tuning amazing ways to communicate their expertise. And that all gets lost because nobody can learn from the knowledge that you derive in teaching incrementally about that topic, because everything is closed. Even on Twitter nowadays, people say it's still very, I don't know, 10 times a day, you see posts like, oh, I'm going to start teaching on this. Can somebody share with me their syllabus? And everything is done via DMs and emails because there's some sort of, protection of, how you should teach about your course. And that's, to me, feels a little bit insane. So that's the sixth aspect of, I'm going to review it later. So
Okay.
have the full
All
picture.
right.
People
But
are,
but
are
people should be taking notes. We should have told them
yeah,
before we started. Get your pens and pencils.
that's why we're here.
Yeah.
And finally, it's the idea of open collaboration, which is just, inserting segments of society and doing science in a way that is accessible in an international perspective, and that takes on perspectives that you otherwise wouldn't take. So this is called open collaboration. So big team science, citizen science, sort of looping in everybody in the scientific process is the seventh. So to recap, It's open data, methodology, source, access, peer review, education, and open collaboration. So that's what open science is. Now,
Okay.
Lori said, Flavio, I don't want to keep telling you, keep keep telling you to say open science. So let me explain what open scholarship is, right? So in open science in general, and its you know components is fine, but for me, open science is a little bit more than open everything, which is very important, and all of those components are extremely important. So that's not to deride on that, but to me personally, it's about most importantly, it's about social justice. It's about the inclusion of disenfranchised people. It's about coalition building. It is about paving the way towards a more transparent, robust, inclusive, diverse, and accessible and equitable science for the future, for everyone, right? So it's a better science for all. So that's what, to me, open science is. So that science is open to minoritized groups, poor folks, folks in low and middle income countries, folks in the global south, and not only the most affluent, even in affluent countries. So open science to me in this larger frame of social justice is about breaking down barriers in accessing science. Not only its outputs, which are very important to have access to, but its many benefits, right? So it's about breaking that glass ceiling that pervades everything academic, science, and research, that only the brightest or only the most genius can succeed in science. And that's not true. If you do diligent work, you can be an awesome scientist. So altogether, I think that science, open science, is you know a, a good term, but it has a history, and it has been associated with certain things, and definitely not associated with things that I want to associate open science with, and they are equity, diversity, and inclusion, and social justice. So we sort of reframe open science into open scholarship to include these aspects explicitly, right? So we also include what aspects of science that are not considered between quote science, like the humanities, right? Qualitative science. And a lot of people, by all means, consider that part of science, of course, but a lot of folks made the aspect, oh, that's not science, right? Historically. And that's inaccurate. So open scholarship has that incorporation explicitly. So it's like open scholarship is, to me, a better term because it's more inclusive. It takes in several ways to acquire knowledge, including indigenous systems of knowledge, right? And well, not most importantly, but importantly for what I do, which is open education, it also includes activities, academic activities like education, mentoring, and service that are not normally included when people think of science, right? So when you speak of open scholarship, you are, it's a bigger umbrella for more people in every sense, if that makes sense. And to me, it becomes a tool that can be used towards developing strategies for addressing the disadvantages faced by minoritized groups in academia.
Okay. So just to kind of make sure that we're all following here. So, open scholarship, or what I'm taking away from what you said is that, open science, is wonderful, but if we look at to the future at what kind of open science do we want, right? If we're of the mindset that, DEI is important, other forms of knowing are important, uh the weight of the baggage of the term science is really, excluding people. Whereas
It is,
once we
yes.
use open, once we, yeah, so open scholarship, now we're encompassing both, the outputs, but everything that gets somebody to even create science in the first place, right? To start creating that ecosystem and foundation for that big tent, equitable field that you can't get if you just start with the science, and everything leading up to somebody becoming a scientist has remained the same, blind. And then we're also locked in with our own preconceived notions of what is science.
You described it perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. And I love, you specifically mentioned indigenous ways of knowing. I will never forget being in a seminar and someone asking the person speaking about they were talking about two spirit person, that concept, and the person wanted to know, like, well, what's the, are there studies, what are the what's your evidence, basically. And she's like, our evidence is, we pass down this information, like. And I was like, yeah, just like, what is evidence to who, or whom, like, it is, that matters as well. We've lost so many things. I live in fire country, right? There is a way of managing where I live that is rejected in the halls of, it's becoming more sensitive to, the history of how lands were managed better. But yeah, look at all that we lose, hundreds, thousands of years of knowledge, if we limit to how we acquire knowledge, what, just for the last 200 years, 400.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that, you know, there's so much to science or research, as because even, there's this discussion about science being, essentially STEM, right?
Mm-hmm.
And research being broader, and then open scholarship being even broader, right? But that richness, that big tent, right, gives me solace in practicing science that is a little less petulant. Is that a word in English? Yeah.
Yes, excellent.
In the sense that it is, there are so many norms, and so I did statistics. I studied statistics for my master's, along with political science and social psychology. So I do political psychology, essentially the psychology of why people vote, why people decide to vaccinate or to not wear a mask, why they some of their beliefs might be considered conspiratorial, and etc. And in this area of research, you deal a lot with the limits of science to explain certain things. And what is funny is the more you learn science, when you start at science, you essentially feel overwhelmed by the body of knowledge that you're not aware of,
Mm.
that you have to learn, and the processes of how you acquire that information in of itself are extremely difficult. That's what we use statistics for, to test whether hypotheses have evidence for or against it. And all just to say is that there is this transformation as you progress through your academic career, that in the beginning as a student, essentially you're holding the world like atlas of,
Mm.
the responsibility of learning all that knowledge. And you get at a postdoc or an assistant professorship, and I'm not sure it's very much meaningful for an assistant professor or a postdoc to say, oh, I have only 3 research questions. You have a gazillion research questions. There's so many areas to expand to. And of course, you say you want to focus on X or Y or Z because you need to take a direction. But there's so much more things to discover. So in the end, it's just how little you know. So it's very humbling. So to look that back all the way back to petulant, I think that our science, dealing with the process of learning, and transforming, from being atlas to seeing how little we know, can sometimes puff people's egos and the
Mm.
way that they approach, knowledge. And it can be complicated to accept other forms of knowledge. So I think that open scholarship is good at recognizing that, even as a statistician like myself, that qualitative science not only has values, but fills many of the gaps that we, as statisticians, think that, we can't address this with statistics. And here come qualitative science, and I'm in awe of their knowledge, of their methodologies, of how essentially amazing is their system of knowledge. And I wish I knew more. Does that resonate?
Yes. Yeah, and I'm thinking about, I'm a big fan of evaluators, and the, idea of mixed methodology, making sure that we are using quantitative and qualitative. It's leaking out, right, into other fields. I love, that I'm seeing more folks really recognizing that there's so much value locked away in your qualitative information. Um, and that, yeah, resonates a lot. And I also, in sharing that little bit, it kind of bridges us into looking at neurodiversity, because the question asker in the story that I'm telling, like once I spoke to that person more, they shared kind of where they were coming from, as in the way that they ask questions. And um they brought value in that they maybe ask things that others wouldn't ask, because of just the way that their mind works and how they interact socially. And so that was another thing that really caught my attention with your work, was kind of remembering the access. We a lot of times think about um, equity and inclusion in terms of, like, here, and especially in the US, racial, issues are very much at the forefront. But people with disabilities, people who have a different neurology, people who, even, someone piped up about being colorblind. They have a colorblind, student, and no one had been thinking about that at all. So what access really means and what inclusion really means, is something I think we're all trying to learn. But
Yes.
yeah, so for the people who are, I think about some of the really great advocacy work going on, um, and how much it looks like solid research. Like, how I wonder how people who are, getting data together, they're putting out, as with as much rigor as they can, their analysis and study of issues through the data that's available out there. So say, like, in the US, um, mapping police violence is a, stellar project, that is, I think, have a lot of exemplary components to how they're approaching putting out that work. So if we look at, open scholarship and kind of that kind of approach, like, what would be, I guess, in your view, a way for folks to really tap into the benefits of open scholarship, and in their advocacy work that they're doing, um, to, I don't want to say elevate it, because I feel like that's getting back to me, but it lends credibility, I
Yeah.
think. And rather than having this separate notion of, like, okay, this is, an advocacy thing, it has nothing to do with these principles of open science and open scholarship. I think that's not true. I think that we would benefit, which is why I wanted to talk to you, from bringing this into that kind of collaborative work that is research.
Yeah. So, so I think that you mentioned a lot of things that my head is a little is spinning,
Yeah.
because I wanted to it's not interject, but to add into to we agree to several things that you said. But I think that the example of the project that you mentioned about mapping police violence. So first of all, it is important to understand that this is an effort that scholars are doing and advocates are doing because of lack of governmental action. And normally, the police works for its citizens, and of course, its data should be openly accessible for the public. the data of other services, like, for example, doctors, or the effectiveness of treatment, or even randomized control trials for drugs that are publicly funded, at least, are majoritarily, there are exceptions, open. And so there's a reason for this. This openness increases trust, right? Trusting the process, trusting government, trusting science, trusting institutions. It's a more efficient enterprise insofar as that you're collecting this public good that a lot of people can find interest in and approach it from different perspectives and derive different kinds of knowledge, all useful, but it's efficient in this regard. It improves quality because with more eyes, with more expertise, folks can build, accumulate knowledge. So there is there's more peer, we would call it peer review, but essentially iterations of reviewers, right?
Yeah.
It improves reproducibility, in the sense that more folks looking at it, trying to look whether the knowledge that you derived proceeds, if it's sound scientifically or whatever other method that you're using to derive knowledge. It expands the role of knowledge making, so not only science, right? So if it's open, everyone can look at it, and different perspectives from people can. I'm always very amazed with people's backgrounds. There's physicists doing social science nowadays, that I'm in contact with people from Ireland, and they have a whole different approach. And it's beautiful that they look at data that I was able to produce in this magnificent new way. In any case, so it expands the scope. So those are the advantages of having data open, right? So and those are also the results or the impacts of having this information open. Not only that, but if we had, for example, police data open, it could inform decision making. It could inform policy. We could be having better police. We wouldn't have a movement, that now essentially wants to defund the police for a reason, because it is not an institution that tends to help, especially parts of the community in the US and other places as well. So this isn't a particularly, it is definitely more intense in the US, but it is an issue in other places as well. So it creates paths for participation of other folks, etc. And all of this ends up or equals to an equitable path towards knowledge making, if that makes sense. So all these are results and outcomes of this openness that you can achieve if you implement open practices into whatever you do.
Right. Yeah, and I realized I should have paused to let you respond. I kind of ran from one one act to another. But before we wrap up, I want to just ask, now everybody, now you know about this man's work and what's going on. And I am curious, what would be your kind of call to action, or once folks are going to look into fort.org, and now that we've got their interests peaked, what would you say would be their first step? Like, how do they get started? And especially for folks that aren't currently necessarily in academia, but are find that these principles resonate with them.
So I think first and foremost, it is important to know that you are welcome. We have a Slack community. There's information about how to get involved, and that might just mean that you create an account to our Slack and you lurk around. You don't have to say anything, do anything. just see us post and turn off your notifications because we're quite busy community. But all this to say is that you are welcome, whatever and wherever you're from. You should feel welcome at Fort. The second thing is to understand what we do. So essentially, we do two things. Well, maybe three. We advocate through the publication of think and opinion pieces towards all these things that I talked about, more equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility in science. So we have a page on Fort that publications that are all accessible to everyone, so you can check it out. And we also do open educational resources. Essentially, what we're trying to do is to create in our educational nexus, so you will see that one of the major headings of our website is several initiatives that aim to, just help teachers, mentors, trainers have an easier time training folks on the topics that are of open scholarship. And that includes everything, every single word we talked about, equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, that is the social justice aspect of it all, but reproducibility crisis, p-values, system of incentives in academia, knowledge making, epistemology, a wide variety of things. And for this, what we do is that we provide summaries of scientific scholarship. We provide lesson plans that are readily available for you to teach on several topics. We have an initiative with activities that are short, 5 minutes to 20 minutes long, that you can readily implement in your class if you're a teacher, even in high school students. We have a list of resources on open scholarship and science in general. We have a list of effects replicated across social sciences. We have over 200 effects that we've collated from several different literature. So, is, a given priming replicable? So does it replicate across cultures? Does it replicate in other studies and etc.? So you can go check it out. So that's what we do. Essentially a lot of work on, it's a little academic, but it's open to non-academics. But there are projects that are non-academic. So for example, it's not that it's non-academic, but it has boundaries that go beyond academia in of itself. So we have, for example, a position statement on neurodiversity, on how scholars have. There has been some strides in inclusion and diversity in academia, but there's definitely this group of people, neurodiverse folks, that have been neglected up until now. And this initiative, this team within science, there's several teams, within Fort, there's several teams within Fort that do different things. And there's this team called Team Neurodiversity that aims to empower neurodiversity scholars by doing a wide variety of things. They have 4 goals. And there's this position statement that is publicly available for you to read, in which we advocate for a different approach. We talk about challenges that neurodiverse folks face. What is it that other non-neuro or neurotypical folks can do to help neurodiverse folks? What is the spectrum of neurodiversity? And we also created, for example, which has nothing, well, it has something to do with academia, but the knowledge therein isn't super academic. But essentially, we created an alternative framing to share credit and to share authorship order. Authorship order is very important in academia. It's something that I'm sure sounds very weird to other folks, like, oh, my name is second or third or fourth. Again, the hidden curriculum. So all this to say is that there's many ways for you to participate, including just lurking around. And we're a nice group of folks, and we would welcome you for who you are and whatever way you can help. Everything is volunteer work, so every work that we do, all 500 of us, there's many lurkers, of course, so you wouldn't be alone on that. But everything that we do is volunteer, is openly available to everyone. And I think that's pretty much it.
All right. Well, thanks again so much. I kind of wish for a second session because I really am very interested in the contributorship models. But we're just gonna have to save that for another time, people. And you're gonna have to go to fort.org and research that and join the lurkers on Slack. But Flavio, I can't thank you enough for being here and sharing of your expertise and experience with us today.
Thank you so much, Lori, for the invitation, for the kind treatment, for being accommodating, um, um, and being a lovely host. Thank you so much for the work you do as well.
All right, thank you. And everybody, we'll look forward to seeing you in the next session.